Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Caroline Colas. I'm the Senior Director of Health and Wellness at the Marlene Meyerson JCC Manhattan. Today, we are going to be speaking to Jody Hoffer Gittel, a professor at Brandeis University, Heller School for Social Policy and Management, and Megan McDonough, CEO of the Whole Being Institute, at our Lunch and Learn series around the personal, bringing together the personal and the social through relational coordination. That's an interesting topic. I'm so excited about that because I feel like our relationships are everything. They're our connective tissue. As we learn about positive psychology, it's good to move beyond the practice as an individual into a larger context. Jody is an expert in how individual relational connections make or break the larger social context, moving the conversation from individual responses to larger social questions about how we relate to one another for the common good. COVID, along with rampant racial injustice, makes this a time when we need to amplify how to move forward constructively through coordinated collective action. Yesterday we talked about from chaos to community, and today Megan is going to be interviewing Jody, who, as I said, is a professor at Brandeis University. Her research explores how people contribute to high performance outcomes through their coordination with each other. She developed the theory of relational coordination, in which our actions are coordinated through frequent, timely, and accurate problem-solving communication, supported by relationships of shared goals, shared knowledge, and mutual respect. I welcome to the call Jody Hoffer Gittel and Megan McDonough. Thank you so much, you guys, for being here.
Thank you, Caroline. Welcome, Jody. Before I turn it over to our conversation, I want to do as I always do and allow us to actually settle into this moment. So, as always, find a comfortable position. We'll do a few minutes centering to make sure that we fully enter this moment together. And for those of you who are new, we do this all the time. We center ourselves and get started. For those of you who do it all the time, you know what's to come. I invite you to take a deep breath in and a big exhale. And with that exhale, just imagine that you're letting go of the moment before this one. And if it's more comfortable for you to close your eyes, feel free to do so. You can keep a soft gaze if that's more comfortable for you. But the gaze, the internal gaze, is towards oneself. So that you begin to turn your attention inward and notice your legs. Allowing your legs to accept the support of the chair. You relax into the chair beneath you. Notice the whole length of your spine, right? From the tip of your tail to the top of your head. Imagine that you're both rooted and grounded, relaxed into the chair, and also there's a lift and an opening and a reaching. And sometimes it can feel like we're carrying around a backpack of responsibility, of weight. Allow yourself during this time to take the weight off of your shoulders and just place it by the floor beneath you. You can always pick it up when we're done. For now, just allow the shoulders to drop away from the ears and become aware of the length of both arms. And feel the volume of your body, the space it takes up. Letting a sense of compassion wash over yourself as you wish yourself well, repeating inwardly to yourself, may I be happy. May I be healthy. May I be safe. May I live with ease. Deep breath in Big exhale. And as you exhale, opening your eyes, find someone to look at in our little Zoom community. And as you look at that one person with a smile on your face and maybe an open heart, say to them, may you be happy. May you be healthy. May you be safe. May you live with ease. Deep breath in. Big exhale. So before I start talking to Jody, I actually just want to set the stage. I recognize that as we invite Jody into our conversation and we welcome new people who perhaps haven't been here before, that it's helpful to lay some context, like who are we? And it really dawned on me when I was interviewing Scott Barry Kaufman, I think it was last week, when he says, who are these people? that question, who are we? Like, oh yeah, I should start with that first. So I was going to do like a 2-minute overview of what got us here. And what got us here is COVID-19 struck, and the epicenter was New York City. JCC closed. Carolyn, myself, and Phoebe, WBI and JCC, knew that we wanted to serve, that a community that had been built around the physical location of JCC all of a sudden, poof, went up, just like, you know, hundreds of thousands of other folks had that happen. And the question became, what was once a vibrant community was now a bunch of isolated folks hibernating away in their room. How do we stay connected with one another? So I do credit the leadership of Caroline saying, you know, we've never done this, but we're going to do it. We're going to work with WBI, and we are going to do a series of every single day lunch and learn webinars about how does one really connect together, and the actual skills, evidence-based skills that we could pull on from positive psychology and other ways in which we can garner the internal resources we have to do to be resilient, to thrive, to actually build capacity during this time. That was the beginning. Now, as we've been doing this since almost day one, what we're finding is, oh, doors are opening, the country is reopening, we're going out and meeting with people, but there's a level of insecurity and fear about how we connect with one another. Oh, and by the way, let's layer on top of that the social inequities and protests and some of the things that we're seeing that heightens this feeling of, my goodness, how is it that we connect and create strong relationships? Because we know that that's the basis, one of the strongest bases for overall well-being is how we connect with others. So we've shifted the conversation from these individual tools within positive psychology to really asking the question of things like social justice and racial equity and ending race-based death, big conversations. And bridging that gap is not always, it's not easy. Bridging that gap, one feels really big, and when sometimes it just feels difficult enough to sort of hold our own sense of peace. What happens when we get together? And two, how do we continue to hold that sense of respect, of peace, of cooperation? So one day I was listening, this was probably the end of last year, I was listening to a podcast from a positive psychology researcher that I love and admire. Her name is Jane Dutton. And I've mentioned her before on these calls because her work is really about not just positive psychology, but what she terms positive organizational scholarship. How do we take the individual and build organizations such that the work of positivity goes beyond the individual, of human thriving and flourishing goes beyond the individual. And one of the questions that the podcaster asked her was, okay, you know, Jane, can you tell me what is the most exciting research that you know of at this point? What should we be watching? And she said, you know, the one I am most intrigued with is by this woman named Jody Hoffer Gittel at Brandeis. The next day, I sent an email, or I don't remember whether I picked up the phone or sent an email, and I had the good fortune of going to Brandeis, of sitting down, having a lovely afternoon, and having multiple conversations about this thing called relational coordination. That kind of brings us to here. I want you to also be aware of, this thriving, it isn't just a me, and it isn't just a you. There's a space between the two of us that we actually have to point to, understand, and consciously develop so that we thrive within a system that thrives. And I do believe that is the longest introduction I have done yet. Jody, welcome. With all that said, welcome. I hope that sets the context good for you.
Thank you. It's so lovely to be here, and I feel very well introduced.
Good.
Along with the entire backstory, and I love the link to Jane Dutton because she's one of my heroes too.
Yes, a lot of good stuff that she's doing. And so I guess the first question is, because that term relational coordination may not be one of everyday use, can we start with the very basics? What do we mean by when we say relational coordination?
Yeah, I have two ways of defining it. One is coordinating our work or our activities through shared goals, shared knowledge, and mutual respect. And another way is communicating and relating for the purpose of task integration. I'll just show one visual, I think, that captures a lot of what it is. This picture here is, I first discovered it in airlines when I was trying to understand how people coordinate flight departures and why it seems to be easier in some places than others. And what I visualized are all these different roles involved in something together. And often they're not even aware of each other, but it's a coordination challenge. And to the extent that they're aware of themselves as a system of roles engaged in the same work, and are able to then intentionally, if they're not already there, build relationships of shared goals, shared knowledge, and mutual respect, the outcomes are just transformatively better. And this is another way of looking at it. These relationships of shared goals, shared knowledge, and mutual respect help to support sufficiently frequent, timely, accurate, and problem solving rather than blaming communication. So it's that kind of relational communication dynamic that I think is at the heart of what a lot of organizations strive to achieve. And to the extent that they can get beyond their various bureaucratic silos and break them down and create these networks of relational coordination, they're able to serve their purpose much more effectively. So I've done a little research into that, which I could talk about, but that's the basic idea. It's pretty simple.
Yeah. So if you could go back for, you just left that.
Sure.
I want to go back for a minute to that thing that looked like a web.
Yeah. Yeah.
And talk a little bit, like putting it in context with us as individuals and the society as a whole. Yeah. So if we were to look at that citizen in need at the very center and consider that to be, if we were to look at that through the lens of African American communities hit by COVID, for example, mm-hmm. that we could look at that question through the lens of who are they interrelated with in terms of the community healthcare workers? What are the friends and systems around that community? Where are they getting their food? So we're taking what can sometimes be sort of a superficial problem in the center that we try and solve in one way. Like we've got to help with getting this community the healthcare they need, but it may be that this community needs food distribution support along with the healthcare. Am I understanding this?
Yeah, I think that's right. We could all come at any given crisis from our own perspective and say what they really need, or what I need to contribute here is my friendship or my being a neighbor. But when people talk about, well, let's look at this more systemically, there's structural inequities, and it's often I think they're picturing something like this, where we may need to totally reform our criminal justice system and the way we do probation and control and racist policing, et cetera, as well as making sure that there are opportunities to, you know, for home ownership and investing in homes and actually getting good education and good employment. So when I see people do relational mapping around any challenge that they're working on, and it's really eye-opening to say, well, who else is needed? And before you know it, you've got all these different circles around. I'll just show a quick picture of when I saw this happening at University of San Francisco. They were UCSF, University of California, San Francisco. They were basically saying, okay, what are some of the big goals we want to achieve in the next 10 years? And who are the different stakeholders that are involved? And before you knew it, every different table had these different stakeholders, and, you know, the social determinants of health, the healthcare delivery system, who's paying for this, you know, where's the, so it's a way of looking more holistically at what's the problem we're trying to solve and who are the other people we're going to have to work with to get there. It's not enough just to come at it as an individual or even a well-intentioned group of individuals, but thinking more systematically of what are the different pieces of this problem and how might we bring them together.
So why is it important, do you think, sometimes these feel like such a big, hairy problem? When you really map this out, what's the positive outcome that you look for once you map something out?
Yeah, well, here's one that I wasn't present, but a colleague just shared this with me. And this was done in Columbus, South Carolina. They had been working with some real community trust issues between youth and the police force due to some incidents. And they got people together to do various kinds of relational mapping. And what my colleague, Lauren Hajar, shared is that a bunch of the maps showed the same thing. There was a disconnect between, I think it was the mental health system and pretty much everybody else. Like they were off and isolated. There were a lot of red lines there. Like they're there, but they're really not helping. They're not helping to as much as they would like to because they're really not connected. And so that gave some kind of visibility into what you might call the current state. And then how can we start maybe convening people and starting to build that relationship and identifying what are our shared goals here in this community? What are our different roles, which is what we shared knowledge is basically, do I understand what you do? Do you understand what I do? And then mutual respect, which is probably the most important and one of the hardest because it's hard to define. It feels different for everybody and you just kind of have to find your way to what does feel respectful to you. But I think being able to just something as simple as who are the players and where are the red lines, where are the green lines suggesting we're already pretty aligned and feel comfortable working together, but then there's some real opportunities that we can identify too.
Yesterday, we had a conversation with two folks about what they called crucial conversations. And it seems to me that these conversations are very crucial that you're putting together, and to really have the cross-functional stakeholders that we need in some societal change, that getting all those people in a room and actually doing that seems really big. Are the case studies you have on, because I know you've done worldwide work where we could look at specifically, this was a big problem that hit a number of different things. Are there usually people like in public health that put this together? It's more than just an organization when we're talking societal stuff.
Yeah, well, here's where we typically have started, which is in health systems, where this is a Gold Coast health system and in Australia, and they were basically trying to figure out how to deliver better quality care. And the CEO, who you probably can identify because healthcare, even in Australia, is gendered, is the man. And he was seeing some red lines and saying, shouldn't that one be green? And they're like, yes, but it's not. So they could start to say, rather than just looking at an organization chart or maybe some survey data, to be able to say, where are the really critical relationships here for achieving our goals? And are some that are broken that might be putting us at risk that we really need to address. So it almost serves as, the term boundary object sometimes comes to mind, where instead of people looking at each other and having these difficult conversations, you see they're all looking at the map.
Yeah.
They're able to
Yeah.
say, yeah, they're almost able to make it not personal. I think personal relationships are so critical, and actually empathetic relationships underlie everything we're talking about here. But this almost helps to move it to that next level of, okay, it's not just about me and you. These are things that are baked in that we can look at and notice and not be defensive about it. And then say, yeah, given where we are right now, where should we start?
Yeah, gosh, I think that is such a pivotal part of the crucial conversations, that you recognize that it's not just me talking to you, and it's not even the space between as I originally sort of positioned it. It's a space between you and I, and the space between you and I and a school system, and the space between you and I and the school system and the healthcare system and the JCC system, whatever system we're integrating. Um, so when we think about this work that we did on these webinars with JCC, the Whole Being Institute and JCC, we could map out an educational organization in Whole Being Institute, connecting with the JCC in their community as a well-being center to the isolated individuals that needed it. And if we were to make more of an impact, we could perhaps say who else should be in the conversation to help people thrive during this time. Is that a good way of thinking about it?
It really is. It really is. I think you can do it specifically related to the challenge that we're facing right now with social isolation and the need for a lot of help that's not necessarily happening in a timely way. But now that you mentioned New York and schools, I'm remembering doing this with a group of facilitators for the New York City Department of Education. And they started putting together maps. One that I remember in particular was student attendance was the challenge. And as they drew the map, they included the neighborhood bodegas in there, because they said, this is where the kids stop on the way to school. If the bodegas were part of, they're part of the community, a really critical part of the community, if they were part of this understanding of how important it is for kids to get to school, they can often be a partner in saying, don't be late for school, that kind of thing. So you can find sometimes invisible partners that you wouldn't necessarily think of that can help to contribute to a shared outcome. So I like to think of these as the invisible visible.
Be making the invisible visible. So I'd like to actually do a little something with the group about making the invisible visible. So if you could stop your screen share for a minute,
Yes.
I want to ask the people on the call today, because Carolyn and I and Phoebe created this because we thought it was needed. And so I think sometimes what I hear you saying, Jody, is that we have to get clear on our goal. And I'm curious, if I were to ask you, what is your goal for joining in these lunch and learns? What would it be? And then I'm going to turn it over. And as you type that into the chat, why are you here? What is your goal for participating? I want to talk to Jody a little bit about what we mean by shared goal, because that in and of itself sometimes is hard to pin down, because all of the stakeholders, you can have a gazillion different goals in mind. What is your goal for being here? And while people are typing that into the chat, Jody, I want to ask you, why is that important, and how do we go about doing that shared goal?
So why is it important to first identify that?
Yeah, yes, we can go everywhere with it. And
yeah.
How hard is it? How do we actually get to a shared goal?
Yeah. Well, sometimes it's that was decided before we all come together into the room. But that doesn't mean that we're all completely in agreement. It could be the facilitators think there's a shared goal. One exercise I've seen work, my colleague Tony Suckman tends to use this one, is inviting everyone around a table with 3 sticky notes saying, what are the top 3 goals you have for our organization in the coming year? Something like that, or whatever the entity is that's coming together. And then you put them together and you start to group them to see what are the patterns, where are the shared goals, where are the goals that may be very important, but they're not what bring us together here, and then facilitate a conversation around that to see how aligned are we on our goals as an organization or as a community, and hearing the ones that are, there may only be 1 or 2 people holding them. That doesn't make them any less important. Maybe once they explain them, people say, yeah, that should be one of our shared goals too. So It's
I
a
mean,
way.
actually, even thinking about that, when we're in a house together, we could actually say, what's our shared goal during the pandemic when we're all stuck together? What is our shared goal for living together under this one roof, which may be new for all of us?
Right. Right. To give each other sufficient space, to be there to support each other, make sure we all have healthy food, keep the place clean, whatever it could be.
I
Yeah.
want to say keep the place clean with everybody helping out. Thank you very much. Let me just take a moment and read what people are saying. Let's see. I'm here to learn and also for the community. So there's a sense of education for you, Jennifer, and learning, and also a sense of community. And Donna says, connect with others and learn from interesting speakers. So connect and learn were actually the first two, seem the same. Connect with friendships and learn and just be together. Learn to handle living in a pardemies. I don't know what that means, Sharon, but learn to handle living in, I don't know what that means. Elaine, goal to thrive, not just to survive at the pandemic. So really living well. Contact with others and learning from others. At first it was because I needed help how I related to the crisis. Over time it's changed. I began to learn new things and approaches. Thank you, Joanne. Kat, connectedness, sense of community, lifelong learning. So we do have some sort of consistency here, don't we, of connection and learning. Seems, if I were to put them into buckets, those, am I doing this properly, Jody? Like if we were to ask this question, this is what.
Yeah. And then differences can be interesting too, having adult conversations when you're home with a 6-year-old. So
Right.
that can be just as beautiful, even if it's just the one unique thing there. So
that's true. And Relicia says here to learn, see how positive psychology assists individuals and organizations. Josephine, to learn, constantly changing, keeping engaged, kindness and self-care. Gives me something to do. Yes, an adult conversation. Oh, that's the one you were talking about. I missed that one. Adult conversations. Oh, these my self-awareness. Learn how to deal better. Caroline, Caroline, you can unmute yourself, would just tell me too. You do have that power.
Yeah, I wanted to stay connected, to be a trusted resource, is to show that we care. JCC for me stands for Join a Caring Community. To also, give my community and the community at large the latest in science about resilience and positive psychology so that we can grow from this experience and we can take advantage of the lessons that we've learned in, post-traumatic growth. Let's that as much as possible, and just to not be isolated, because for me isolation is one of the most stressful things for our health and well-being. So that was really important to me.
Thank you, Caroline. One of the things is I have other questions for Jody that I'll continue to ask, but I'm curious, what are you curious about? So if you have questions for Jody, please type it in, and Caroline, if I miss some, let me know. So thank you for sharing about why it's important for you to get together, that connection, learning, adult conversations. I appreciate that. What are questions you might have for Jody? I wonder, Jody, too, when you think about, we talked about the educational system, we talked about the work down, I think you said, was that in Kentucky that you said that was with the police community, where there were mental health was left out?
Yeah, it was Columbus, South Carolina.
South Carolina.
Yeah.
Are there other places where you've seen what we're seeing with sort of the protest and that type of scale to be used, something like relational connections, to help move it into a conversation in a way that helps create action towards a shared goal?
Yeah, I mean, as you know, I started with airlines and then health systems. So this move to a broader social level is still pretty new, and I think it's incredibly exciting. Like most of us, I've been dragged along by people who are younger than myself, kind of finding new ways to use the ideas that I originally came up with. So I'll show you one thing and then get into a really cool example that fits what you're describing. So this is the model that I developed in my first study in the airline industry. I was a student at MIT and I was studying, how do people coordinate flight departures? And what I found was there's this dynamic of relational coordination that drives some really important outcomes I wasn't studying personal well-being at that point, but I added that very quickly: worker and client well-being, learning innovation, efficiency, and financial outcomes, as well as quality and safety, which has been the most studied. But there's tons of research now looking at, anywhere from banking in Pakistan to, social movements in Boston, where people are looking at how do you measure these networks and how do they affect the outcomes that we care about. And then to understand, well, how do organizations support those networks through some very basic things like selecting and training for teamwork, making sure we have a sense of shared accountability for the whole and not just each of us for our own little piece, and things like that, creating a relational space when we get together in meetings. So there's a lot of learning there. But as we start, I think I'm not actually, am I actually sharing that right
Yes,
now?
I saw that. Yes, and I
Was that?
now,
Yeah.
and now
Okay.
you took it down. Yeah.
Yeah. Just so there's been a lot of learning there, but to get back to like, how does this play out at the social level? Here's, I think, where we're moving in terms of what we now call the relational society framework, because I've really been working at that middle level, and I think probably in this Whole Being Institute, there's been a lot of attention at that micro level to,
Yes, I would
how do we
agree.
actually create that basic, and you can't take that for granted, because we were just on a webinar talking about, all kinds of health system transformations during COVID. And what everybody said is it all starts with empathy. And if you don't have that, you're not going to have a good, you're not going to be able to help people become well. And so I think that's the foundation of everything. And, for something to really be a sustainable change over time in our society, we need to get to that macro level of social policy and making sure that we've built the institutional supports, that we have, the police, for example, trained the right way, and also where they understand what can be done and what cannot be done. So you need laws, but it all starts with human empathy. And I think the way you get from one to the other is through people organizing together to say, okay, now we understand what the problem is. Now, how do we get that turned into a supportive institutional context that will allow us to really meet all these different needs? And so one of the recent examples was 4 different cities in Massachusetts where they were working on youth violence and policing issues. And some of them they all had this basic intervention around safe policing. And what some of them also had was an intervention around relational coordination, where they really looked at the different stakeholders and did the relational mapping. And you did have differential outcomes when you took that relational approach, bringing the different community stakeholders together. So let me pause and just see what others are.
Yeah, Caroline, you have your hand raised.
Yes, I was curious about how you select and train for teamwork.
Yes. Well, I mean, there are a lot of teamwork training programs, so maybe that's not as, and there's no one way. I think in healthcare, for example, there's something called Team Steps. That has been a pretty popular teamwork training program. It has some of the same underlying principles of RC, so people have been able to take that and adapt it well. A lot of it is as basic as understanding who else is caring for that same patient or individual, or who else is involved in this work that you're doing, and what do they do, and do they understand what you do, and do you understand what they do? So
Gotcha.
it's not just training to do your own job, but understanding who are the different roles, how does my role relate to them, and how does what I do make their job easier or harder. So it's more of a horizontal kind of understanding of the work,
Right.
rather than just what's my silo.
And Megan, it strikes me that the strengths work is also training for teamwork, right? When we understand somebody's strengths on our team, we can understand what they're bringing to the picture, and then also utilize those strengths and actually set the teams up so that they can be successful.
Right, I would agree with that, and that's been a powerful sort of place between the oversight of the micro in ourselves and this next step of interacting with others. And I'm really excited about that sort of 3-pronged approach to looking at relational coordination at the micro level. And I do think that no matter what you do on the other two levels, it always comes back to the people in the room and how they're showing up, which is sort of what I wanted to sort of elevate for this group is as you learn these techniques for yourself, that they impact you positively, but don't you also find that the way that it sets you up in being in relationship with others is more helpful and constructive once you are more grounded in yourself. And also, I think we have a tendency when there's a problem that arises, we blame and we place sort of simplistic ways of trying to fix it onto either someone else or some other group, or if they only did their job. And we can even run into that when we call, say, our healthcare provider, and we experience the fact that we can't find a therapist for someone we love because they're all backed up for the next 6 months. And sometimes we feel stuck in a relationship, in a relational uncoordination world. So that's sort of the basis of what we're talking about. So let me just go
back to Caroline's other question about how do you select for teamwork? Because I think that's trickier than training. And in a conversation I was just in, someone who's founded this healthcare organization that's all based on empathetic connection said he hires for empathy because you can't train that. And that's like the first thing. He'll train people how to take blood, anything, but empathy you have to find. And so I wonder about that. I do remember when I was saying you have to, hire for values and teamwork and understanding each other because you can't teach that. And I really got some pushback from some labor leaders in particular who said, we have to represent all of our workers and we don't give up on any of them and they all can learn how to do this. So let's not write them off. So this idea that everyone has the potential to be empathetic and to be, attentive to the needs of others. So it's a question of finding that core and tapping into it rather than writing people off. So
we see that, by the way, again and again and again at Whole Being Institute, that the tools we teach on how to show up, how to stay grounded, how to be empathetic with the person that you're with, how to connect with pro-social emotions, that they are not only trainable in relationship to oneself, but they're trainable in how we interact with others. So let's not give up. Let's.
And I was thinking about Daniel Siegel's work in attachment, and also name it to tame it, and also compassion, and his concern that when we're, and Dr. Sherry Kelly too, about when we're so attached to our devices and we're not really making those empathetic connections with one another and looking at one another. And that actually was one of the reasons I wanted this series to continue too, was so that we could stay connected. We have some really interesting questions in the chat. Maggie,
yes,
do you want
let's
me to read
them?
them?
Yes, please.
Sure. One is, where in this framework would the work of power, privilege, oppression, bias, discrimination, and the like fit in?
I would love some help on that. I'll say some initial thinking, and then love to hear from, is it Relacia?
Relacia.
One place that we see power and privilege showing up when people do the mapping, we sometimes invite people to show that same tie between any two groups in both directions. How's it working for our group? How's it working for yours? And so instead of seeing something that might look like, oh, it's fine, it's not great, it's not terrible, if you look at it from both perspectives, from the higher power group, it's likely to be, yeah, it's working pretty well. They respect me, they share my goals, they understand my work, their communication is timely. If you look at it from the other perspective, they're more likely to report, it's terrible, it's not working at all for me. Whether you're talking doctor, nurse, or other groups of power and privilege. So sometimes it will show up there, and that's one of the biggest ahas for people, is that same relationship might be working very differently on both sides. And so then what do you do about it? Sometimes just understanding it helps, like, oh my gosh, this is working great for me because I'm the surgeon, I'm not the secretary. And when I hand off, follow-up notes on a sticky note saying that's illegible, that feels incredibly disrespectful for the person who has to make all the follow-up. So it's that asymmetry where I think the power and privilege shows up. But I'd love your thinking on how to enrich that, because it's really just a starting point.
Do you want us to unmute her? Did you want to add?
Yeah, if you're able to just share any. where you see limitations or potential to.
Well, I also should ask if you
Yeah.
would like to share. If you would, I'm on a new computer, you guys. So Megan, you might have to help
Oh,
me.
yes, I have it. So, Alicia, I've unmuted you if you want to share or add to that or give perspective to that.
Just really looking to see where it's even addressed, right? Because frameworks are frameworks, and once you get down to building relationships, how do you tease out some of those very present issues? And if the framework addresses them, and if not, how do the tools around positive psychology assist in those areas?
Yeah. So one of the interventions that I've seen that's pretty basic is it's basically best selves, and it's a tool to identify and build mutual respect. So the structured conversation goes like this: what does it take to bring my best self to work? What do I need for that to happen? If it's a workplace, and it could be, what does it take to bring my best self into this community? And then people kind of reflect on that themselves and then start to share it with each other. And it tends to get at what I need to be acknowledged and respected as a full person. And those are not the easiest conversations to have, but in a facilitated, this is presuming we've created a safe space, which often takes a ton of work up front to even, like, what do you do before people even come to the room? But that kind of conversation gives people some insights into, wow, they basically need what I do need, which is to be, someone to say, hello, good morning, make you feel welcome, and hello, and make you feel acknowledged and respected as a human being. Could be that when I ask for something, you get back to me in a timely way, considering what I need and not just what your own needs are. But those can start to come together, and then we can, from those, start to create a code of conduct. So here's what, it was one of the organizations in Baltimore, one of the major Jewish community organizations that did this in a group of 100 people, and out of what came out of those 10 tables, they created a kind of a code of conduct for what we will do to meet each other's needs for respect, because they had a fairly diverse group, and we're still working at how to create that that inviting environment. But does that sound at all realistic, or where would you see the challenges in something like that?
I unmuted you if you want to answer that.
Yeah, and yeah, so I do see it addressing some interpersonal issues, and then I wonder, how does it really begin to impact culture and larger systemic issues?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's where I think that's a really good exercise for building that empathy, by understanding, oh my gosh, some of these things are so simple. Why don't we just do those? And how do we make it more structural? I think we could. I mean, it turned out in that case, the HR department was there, which started to work on, well, what can be some, new practices that we have as people come in? So we can start making it part of our institutional culture to do some of these things that people have identified as necessary for them to bring their best selves to work. So you start to move from this individual, it's kind of bubbled up into some new structures to support that culture. But I imagine there are some major barriers that if you're really continuing that journey all the way up to institutional supports, that it's going to require people to get involved at multiple levels, often beyond your immediate organization to even the larger environment, the community that we live in, because it's all, it's all connected. But anything that you use in your practice that might be helpful here, it started as a body of research, and it's really evolved into a body of practice. So it's really people like those on this call who have taken it to that next level, and it's got a long way to go.
Thank you, Jody. Thank you, Alicia. And I've got to say, I think that, your other part of that question of where does positive psychology stand? Positive psychology is pretty white. When we look at the practice and the impact, if I look out when I have big events, I recognize that we are not calling forth the communities of color. So we are as an organization thinking things like, how do we shape this conversation such that we are more diverse, not only who comes to our courses, but who teaches our courses. So as part of it too, Jody, when we come back to the relational mapping, when we think about what is our role in this, how do we participate? What I am so enlivened by in the protests is heightening the questions of how we show up in our sphere of influence, whatever that may be. As imperfect as it is, as big and thorny as the problem is, as overwhelming as it seems, when I bring it down to what does that mean for me? What does that mean in my community? And what does that mean in terms of my organization that I play a role in? And how do I shape those kind of conversations? Which this is helping me. This interaction is helping me do that.
Yeah, and it seems like the part that I haven't really shared, but this relational intervention, and I've had this experience recently at protests where I feel like we are just having a relational intervention right now where we are creating a shared voice to really understand, where each other is coming from, and we're creating a safe space for people to engage. I think this second one should really be empathetic connection, to build these empathetic connection and say, okay, let's kneel for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. And what goes through your mind and your entire being is, having to think about something that many of us don't have to think about at all. And so I think we can create these interventions and these spaces where we can start to think about some really difficult things. And I wonder if positive psychology can be a bit of a misnomer because it's working toward the positive, but without ignoring, and we don't want to fail to grapple with the negative. And maybe that's why it can feel to some like a body of work that's about privilege, because we're, privileged to be able to think about the positive and not have to address right in the face the negative. Like, say, critical race theory is really looking at what are the obstacles, very attentive to the negative. And is there some way to bring these worlds together?
Oh, that's so wise. Thank you, Jody. And yes, Caroline, you had something to add there.
Yeah, I was struck yesterday by Dr. Stephen Redmond and what he said about being arrested twice within 25 minutes, and how the practice of both mindfulness and his positive psychology knowledge saved him. Like he just, that really impacted me. I thought like, oh my gosh, this gorgeous man, could have been killed because of one number in his license plates. And he had the wherewithal. He said, we must not only be empathetic, but mindful, right? And to take that pause. And I think that ability to pause and to be able to choose, what am I going to say? What is my bias? What lens am I looking through this? Let me stop and listen. And as Warren and Marcy were talking about, I'm used to being a leader, but it's not my time to lead. It's my time to listen, right? And ask. And also to not be defensive when someone says to me, I don't feel like you respect me, right? Or I don't feel like, right? Or I don't feel like I have that equity that I need. So I don't know if that is, but it just struck me that we see from him how he's using those positive psychology. He also mentioned the Black Yoga Teachers Alliance as well, and how he just felt like the techniques were life-saving.
Yeah, so that's at micro level of the individual that you had talked about, Jody, and then taking it up a notch to the meso, and then the bigger macro of the societal issues. Because if we could use all of the positive psychology tools we want as an individual, if there's still societal knees on a neck, the problem will continue, right? So it's having all of those pieces.
But even that mindfulness that Carolyn just spoke of, and using it in these moments of great danger, I remember being trained to do civil disobedience, and a lot of that is about, think about the tradition of Martin Luther King and Gandhi and so on. A lot of that is about collective mindfulness and deliberately breaking an unjust law, knowing that you may get arrested, but being prepared to do it in a very peaceful way. And there's so much training that goes into doing that, because in order to take that pause and not react but respond. So it seems like even that thing that happens at a micro level could be very deliberately trained at a coordinated collective action level.
We had a comment in the chat from Jane. It sounds like systemic institutional impact. You would need all of the actors to come to the table and understand the impact they all have on one another, i.e. relational map to figure out the actors, then figure out how they affect each other, establish the goal, and figure out how to get there. But how does that play out when the actors and powers don't have empathy? It was an amazing example, but it showed that the policing system didn't have empathy for him. It's one-sided, and it always has been one-sided, where you can't express that it's unjust.
Yeah. I mean, I've had this conversation most often with people who are addressing wrongdoing and really aggressive, unprofessional behavior in health systems. And I've heard it from both sides. I've heard it from the position of people who are oppressed by that, who are afraid of, physicians going off the handle and throwing things in a surgical room, et cetera, taking advantage of their power in a very harmful way. But then the physicians themselves saying, we need empathy too. Someone needs to really, let's treat it. Let's first of all, almost like asking first for restorative justice before punitive measures. So I tend to be an optimist about people's potential to change if they are brought into a conversation and given a chance to see the other person's point of view, and in order to become, to have the empathy that they appear to lack. Right. But there's got to be at some point that they have to be taken out of the equation so that they are no longer a danger to the people they are supposed to be caring for and supposed to be protecting. Right. So I think that is one of those tough decisions that we have to build into our system so as to protect the people who are supposed to be, the people in need from being oppressed and harmed by those who are supposed to take care of us. It's
interesting. I'd like to actually circle around to this idea of power, because there was some work, I can't remember the researcher's name in New York, talked about if you have high power, your range of acceptable behavior is much bigger than those in low power situations that have limited ways in which they could act that would be socially acceptable in that given situation. And that's usually the oppressed low power position. Like, there's only a short range of me. Yeah, you practice your meditation, don't speak out because this is the range of behavior that's acceptable. Anything above that. Whereas people with high power, does that come up in your relational mapping work? How does that usually play out? Because that's fundamentally the key of one of the things that are at the base of what happens between these disordinate power plays.
So the systems themselves and the standards for appropriate behavior are themselves completely inequitable. I have not seen a systematic way of addressing that, but what you're saying is so true. Just heard a story here in New Hampshire, which is extremely white, of I'm part of the local NAACP chapter, Seacoast NAACP, and I hear things there that I would not normally hear, and it's it's very emotional. So not too long ago, a young man was driving, got pulled over. He was a Black man, was terrified that what's going to happen to him. And so he didn't turn down the window. He wanted to talk through the window. He was justifiably scared, given everything that's happening. The police officer broke his window and pulled him out by his dreadlocks and threw him on the ground. And if that was my daughter or your son, that's not going to happen. So what you're saying about what is considered acceptable range of behavior, depending on your power and your race and so on, is I think that's it's something that we have to address. And I don't know if I have any particular tools for that, but it's
Well, but I do think your relational mapping is a tool for it. I mean, that's why one of the reasons I want to discuss it with you, because a lot of times people in high power positions don't recognize the scope of their power position, and those in low power position are really trying to navigate in this little space. And if those two people mapped out what is their shared goal, what are the way in which we're working together, they would be able to, if they pick the shared goal properly, have a conversation or have some sort of like, how do we maneuver this? So I do think relational coordination, how we're talking to one another, and how we communicate and problem solve, and this is what I think you do. I don't see any other way but to do it through this type of mapping out of social change.
And perhaps the listening. So to hear what's it like for you, and what's it like for you, and to start to hear, because I think the first step to empathy is actually listening, which I think has come up a few times here, and we don't always have the chance to listen to voices that are coming from a very different place than our own. So facilitated listening at that empathetic level, but then building it up to, okay, so what are the solutions for this? Some of it is just this presumption of guilt, that as opposed to this, let's give them a space, they probably just made a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
That's.
Well, I am heartened that people like you and your team are studying how to do relational connection in a way in which we see that it's more than just the person. It's actually a structural thing that needs to be addressed. It's a beginning, and I'm so glad we had the conversation. Caroline, I know you keep unmuting yourself. You want to add, because we are heading up towards time. And
I just wanted to say, I kept thinking in my mind of orchestras and how there's a conductor, right? And then the conductor is a leader to me, in which there's control there, but there's also, in order to make music, there's an incredible amount of direction and listening and back and forth. And maybe what we're talking about is orchestration, right? And hearing different voices and looking at this from a different lens, and not seeing most effectively that somebody is other than me. If somebody is other than me, then I can hurt them or they can hurt me. Do you know what I'm talking about? In my meditation teacher, she talks about the power of othering. And when you other someone, you allow hate or discord to enter in, and then harm can enter in too. So if there is a lot of internal work as like a cell in the organization of the body. I always go to the body, right? Like there is that part. How am I functioning? Because we are all connected. And I think the impact both of the power of one of us to influence the whole, as well as the whole influencing one of us. So I have hope too. Is that all that to say, Jody?
Yeah, I would love to just share that we are conducting this Relational Society project with sites in the US and, Europe and Scandinavia, Nigeria, Pakistan, and China, to look at communities that are intentionally working to create a more relational society of mutual respect for all, using those different levels from human empathy to institutional change. So I hope we have lots to learn and to share back. Because I think this is all a work in progress, and we all need to be learning from each other and with each other. So thank you for hosting such an amazing learning community right here. I've really enjoyed it.
Wow, that's fantastic that you're doing all of these sites from Oregon to China, Pakistan, Norway, Nigeria. Yeah, thank you. That's amazing work. And it's only at the beginning, Jody. I know there's much more fun to come as we learn and grow. It'll take all of us, from researchers to practitioners to individuals to churches and healthcare systems, to actually move this into a better place that we can all enjoy equity and flourishing. So thank you, Jody. Caroline, any ending thoughts or for next week's
Yes, you guys, we have
schedule?
an amazing schedule next week. Megan, did you want to remind everybody that Dr. Stephen Redmond and Nina Sima are going to be doing a course at Whole Being. They were here yesterday. Please sign up for the events. If you signed up for one Lunch and Learn series, you'll get the recordings of everyone. And Jody, we would love your slides so we could include them if you feel comfortable with that. For that. And then next week we have Megan, who's going to be talking. Once again, we're going to be doing the 36 questions and mixing it up and looking at Barbara Fredrickson's work and how to elevate and broaden and build our own connection to ourselves and one another. And then I believe Val's coming, and she's going to talk about leadership. And I don't have, again, my computer screen. I have to figure that out. Oh, wait, I can tell you. I think you texted me. Unita is coming.
Yes.
And she is going to be discussing also leadership. Again, we're going to be in the diversity space. We're going to be talking about a lot of these things, and we'll send it out to you. So look online. How's that for an ending?
Look online, look it up, people. Enjoy your weekend. We don't have programming on Friday. We shall see you back next week. Thank you again, Jody, for joining us.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Jody.
Thanks, Carolyn. Good to meet you guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.